All right, welcome to Rebel, Excel, Relate. I'm your host, RB Kelly, and in an age where mediocre is mainstream and text is the new talk, it is more important than ever to question the status quo and courageously create more excellence in the world, starting with ourselves and how we show up with our relationships. I am here today with Brandon Voss to talk about conflict, negotiation, and tactical empathy. And we are going to get started. Hi, Brandon. Thank you for being here.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this with you.
I'm very excited you're here. So viewers, if you don't know Brandon, we are going to give him a chance here to push the brag button. And he's going to introduce himself as if you were a jury member at a murder trial and he was an expert giving a testimony. So he's going to lay out his credentials so you know exactly what you're dealing with. Brandon, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm going to do my best. I like this idea, the brag button, and I don't brag on myself very often, but we'll see how it goes here. So the first thing is I'm in a very privileged position. You know, I think that has a lot to do with, you know, what's shaping me as a human being and as a business person and as an entity within the Black Swan Group and working with Chris. And, you know, it's you're born the son of a hostage negotiator, right? I didn't have a lot of choice in that. It just kind of that's where I ended up. And, you know, getting to see him work really hard at something that he loved doing, you know, that's a fun thing to, I think, experience for any kid. And then also, you know, hearing some of the inside stories from him and what he had to deal with. But as far as what they did help, how that shaped me, and, you know, first of all, in regards to loyalty, integrity, and then understanding how to get someone on your side. And I think that was a big part of it, being able to see him do it and hear about him doing it in small instances and pick it up along the way. And then in my own professional life, you know, I got a sales background. You know, I love doing sales. I love dealing with people. You know, that's a fun thing for me then, and it's a fun thing for me now. And this whole idea of creating buy-in with anyone you speak with, you know, there is a skill to that. And I don't know if it's necessarily something people are born with. I think it is learned in a lot of ways. And so I've been in an environment where I've got to learn that and then, you know, experience it. And, you know, I'm a mixed kid. So, you know, I've seen a lot of different aspects of life. I think I take that for granted as well. And talking to people from different environments, different cultures, and creating places where you can influence behavior, you know, there's no shortcut for experience.
That is pretty cool, Brandon. I think that's a lot. It must almost in some ways feel like you're carrying the weight of a legacy almost, where you've got your dad's legacy that you're trying to continue, but you're also bringing your own experience into it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And especially with the business, with Black Swan, you know, we've built it together since the beginning. And that's what's been fun. I've been involved since the very first client, since the very first meeting, you know, all the way up to now. And putting this together as a team, as opposed to being handed the keys to the nice new car. It's like, just don't crash the car, kid. You know, and being in a place where, you know, we got bills. We need clients on the roster. We got things we got to pay for. And going through that together, you know, it's a fun thing to experience. And then having to do it with your dad is, you know, it just adds another element to it. That
is really cool. And I think there's kind of that element of not just, oh yeah, I got this from my dad, no big deal, but this is something my dad and I built from the ground up together. And I think that makes a huge difference in how you look at it.
Yeah, I think it does. And the sales background helps as well, because the one thing we've identified early on is when you're a hostage negotiator, it's great. There's a lot of sexy stories, you know, it's especially for the marketing these days. It's a wonderful thing. You're always a buyer. You're never selling hostages as a hostage negotiator. And while you're dealing with, you know, and so bringing the sales aspect to it, right? How do we apply this to when you're trying to convince people, like, you can trust me, you can learn from me, you can buy this from me. I got something for you that's going to make your life better. And applying it in that way it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, now that you mention it, I can actually see that gap. Because there have been times in the book, by the way, viewers, if you don't know, this is the book we're talking about, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it. The book is full of such cool stories. And sometimes I'll be reading it and I'll think, damn, that is really cool. And then it's like, but wait, how do I use that? And so I think your element of the sales background helps you really easily translate that and turn it into, oh, something I can understand.
Yeah, I think it does in a lot of ways. And again, having a mentor and being introduced to other guys, like we had Derek Gaughan and Isaac Bencourt, a couple of other great instructors, also former crisis negotiators. Being around guys like that and being able to bounce ideas off of them, you know, you can't help but pick up some of the genius that falls out of their pockets.
That's a good way of looking at it. And so just for our viewers, I don't think we've talked about the Black Swan. What is the Black Swan? Why should they care?
So the Black Swan Group is the name of our company that we started back in 2009, officially on paper. I had our first client in 2010. And so Chris originally got the idea from reading the book, The Black Swan. And it has to do with the discovery of the improbable, this discovery of the unknown unknowns, right? And what that can do to your situation once they're revealed. And of course, it's on you to reveal them in the conversation, right? Create so much trust with the other side that they feel comfortable thinking out loud in front of you and telling you things they normally wouldn't tell others. And so discovering those black swans is such an integral piece of any negotiation that it had to be what we named the company. And so we rebranded. We got a new logo that we've had for a couple of years now. It's a lot better than our old one, but that's kind of where it started, and that's where our efforts are, right? When we're teaching people, how do we teach them to discover the 3 to 5 black swans in every negotiation that they're going to be in?
Interesting. All right, thank you for kind of summing that up for us, so people, when we say the Black Swan Group, they know what we're talking about. But what was it like for you growing up with an FBI crisis negotiator for a dad?
It was a cool thing. He was definitely the most popular parent on career day. When he showed up at the school and had like little plastic FBI badges and was going and handing them out, I mean, he was the coolest thing since sliced bread, right? Or without the crust, right? Of course, in grammar school. So, it was very fun. It's cool to talk about. He's always been that like mysterious dad. And, especially when I was growing up, and my friends will tell you this, he was much rougher around the edges. So even as like a 6 and 7 year old, if he'd pick me up from school and hey dad, meet, this is Billy, my friend Billy, I want you to meet him. And like, how you doing, Billy? And that's how he'd meet these 6 and 7 year olds, right? When I was a kid. And so, it was always this kind of facade, right? It's a cool thing. It's fun. But, he worked a lot. Right. I mean, the reality is he was working cases internationally in the Philippines and the Middle East. He's got crazy stories about, traveling through Baghdad in a helicopter and, all kind of stuff like that, which meant he wasn't as home as much as he would have liked to have been. And so, we were still very close as when I was a kid, and I still got to learn a lot from him. And of course, hear the cool stories, right? He had classified information that he couldn't share with people, but he could talk to his son about it. So, cool stuff like that. And then, so that was a lot of fun. Officially moved in with dad when I was 17 in the DC area. And that's when I think our relationship really started to grow. We're getting to spend more time together, and building the business has been, it's been being able to write content down together, build content together. How do we get this information out to people in a way that they can absorb and makes it interesting? And then running across Tall, when we finally got a chance to write the book, Tall was, I think, the 4th writer we had been through. We'd been trying to nail down a writer for a little over 2 years, and Tall kind of fell into our lap. And so he did a great job kind of constructing everything. He sat down, he stayed in my house for 2 days, slept in our guest room, and interviewed me and dad in the kitchen, and for like 18 hours a day. He had recording equipment set up everywhere. And, the book is the product of that. And so I think, we thank Tall a lot. He was a huge component in how do we create this in a way that really starts to shake the world up a little bit.
Thank you. And when did you go from, hey, cool, my dad is a negotiator, to I'm going to build a negotiation business with him?
Well, I think entrepreneurs probably in our blood a little bit. You know, my grandfather, his dad, he was an entrepreneur. He ran his own business out in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and where my dad grew up. And you know, I got the chance to run my own business here in the DC area, washing and waxing boats. You know, when I was 15, I had a crew of 5, and we were out there washing and waxing boats in DC and Southwest, and you know, had way more money than a teenager should have because, you know, we were out there working. We're out there in 100-degree heat, you know, waxing. And so, and I worked for my grandfather when I was little. You know, I started flying out. You know, one of the things, I mentioned being a mixed kid earlier, you know, growing up in the New Jersey area when I was younger and getting a flight to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and worked for my grandfather at the age of 6. You know, I worked half days at 6 years old, right? Flying out there, connecting through Chicago. You're not allowed to fly on an airplane till you're 8, but I was doing it at 6, right? I was a big 6-year-old. And you know, shoveling horse manure, painting barns. You know, again, that whole idea, there's no replacement for experience. And, you know, I got a family that made sure they started instilling that in me at a very young age. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And then, you know, running a business in the middle teen years, you know, that was a real business. You know, I wasn't getting money from parents. You know, Dad was working a Philippines case. The Jeff Schilling case in the book was around that time. And so, you know, it's fun. You know, it's good. I've gotten to see and do a lot of cool things.
Now, one of the principles that's mentioned in the book that, depending on who I'm talking to, people are either duh, obviously, or
yeah,
no, that's totally wrong, is tactical empathy. Can you kind of explain what is tactical empathy? Why does it matter?
Yeah, so really, I think the easiest way to look at it is when you start to differentiate between empathy and sympathy. And, you know, it's almost, I feel like we're done a huge disservice in this day and age, because if you look it up in a dictionary, empathy and sympathy definitions are very similar. The way that we apply it in negotiation is a very fine line. And sympathy is very much about, I feel what you feel, right? You're sad and I feel your sadness, or I've been there, right? I've been through that before and I know what that feels like. You know, that's sympathy. And while emotions are an ever-present factor in negotiation, there really isn't any room for sympathy. And the great thing about empathy is it's an actionable item. You know, you are verbalizing how the world would be described if they said it themselves. And unfortunately, and I'll let you jump in, but I'm just going to say the unfortunate part about that is sometimes there are very negative things in what they see. And when you forego addressing those, you just dig yourself into a deeper hole. But please go ahead. I know you had a question.
All right. Well, actually, as you were talking, I'd kind of been chewing on the idea of sympathy versus empathy for a while. And as you talked and explained them, it like exploded. And so I noticed when you were using the idea of sympathy, you were saying, I know how you feel. I've been there before. I've seen this. And when it was empathy, it was, you're feeling this way. You must be going through this. You. And so sympathy is more about, yeah, I've been there. Let's talk about me. And empathy is, let's talk about you.
That's a great differentiator right there. You know, sympathy brings the attention back to you in a lot of ways. And empathy keeps the attention on them, which then also leads to, they feel like you're more trustworthy because you're taking the time to really figure out what they see. Doesn't mean you agree with it. I mean, that's the nice thing about empathy. You don't have to agree to say, you think the sky's green. You know, I don't agree with that, but I can verbalize it for you and go, you know what? Yeah, I do see that the sky's green, and here's why, and here's all the reasons, and the gases and the environment changes, and all, right? Whatever it is, they're immediately going to open up, and you instantly become smarter in that moment.
Now, this was something that I struggled with for a long time. In tactical empathy, you teach some of the ways to use it. And I remember thinking, I'm really skeptical about this. But then I tried it in an argument where my husband had had a horrible day, came home in a nasty mood, walked in, and he started like lashing out verbally. And instead of like defending myself and being like, bring it, I was like, I mirrored that back at him. It sounds like you feel this. You had this sort of day. This is how you're feeling. And instead of us having like a nasty fight, it was in 5 minutes, he was like slumped over on the couch and we were like chilling out together. It was the easiest fight ever. And so for me, that was the moment when I was like, this works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. That's also what I love about that story is it's also a great depiction of this whole idea of delaying to save time that we talk about in the book. And when you're going out of your way to be empathetic, right? To take that actionable item and do something with it and describe the world to them as they see it and approach it very much the way that you explained it, it feels like a delay because you're not putting your best foot forward as you might think about it, or you're not getting your point across. And it feels like you're delaying time because you're not taking the time to lay out your justifications. When in fact, in the long run, you came to a solution much faster than if you had been going back and forth in an argument for who knows how long, right?
I think you're spot on there with the time. And I also had a client too, she talked to me about some of the negotiation techniques that she was using. And she said, I need them the most when I have the least capacity to use them. Where like at the end of a long, hard day, she knows she should take the time to be patient and empathetic, but she feels like she doesn't have the strength to do it. And so I think energy comes into it as well. Whereas if you take the energy to be empathetic, no matter how crappy you feel, you'll end up spending less energy in a fight. And if you can muster the strength to use these skills, no matter like how far you are at the end of your rope, you're not going to fall any further down the rope.
That's a great way to put it. And what it boils down to is making a decision. I mean, we're constantly asking people that are getting to a place like where you are, where you're like, all right, I'm starting to wrap my mind around this. I'm executing it. I'm using it. And then you have people that are struggling, right? They're in the same place, just like what you described. Like they don't feel you have the energy, or you don't feel you're getting your own point across. And unfortunately, it's a very simple thing that boils down to a decision. It's just that decision can be tough, especially to keep it in the forefront of your mind. But then secondarily is you do waste less energy in the long run. That's what it really boils down. Like, wow, you're going to be shocked, just very much like you described. Like, I can't believe that it got solved that fast. I can't believe I found all that out, and now we're past it. Like, how did this happen? It feels like you've done it. That's when it feels like you performed the Jedi mind trick. That's when it truly feels that way.
Yeah. And I also thought it was interesting that it seems like there are two components when you disagree with someone. And most people only ever get to one of those components. And the two components are you listen to their point of view, and then you share what you want to happen. And so it seems like some people only ever use one or the other of the components, where maybe they are too impatient to listen to the other person. So it they just keep talking at them. Or maybe they are so uncertain about how they want to solve it that they'll just empathize, and never actually say, hey, the sky is blue.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you advise people to handle those?
So a great excerpt from the book Beyond Winning. Robert Mnookin, big time professor up at Harvard, and a few other authors I can't remember at the moment, put this book together. And there's a piece in there. It's in chapter 2, I believe, and it's called the tension between empathy and assertiveness. And it really breaks down, number one, that empathy is assertiveness is a required component. However, there's a sequencing issue. And assertiveness is much less accepted by any counterpart if empathy hasn't preceded it. And so the empathy greases the skids, as it were. And they do a great job really breaking it down. And it talks about sequencing it out. But then, of course, wrapping your mind around how to do, we all know how to be assertive, right? We all know how to say, I want this, or I think this, right? We can all do that. Yeah, that's true, right? Some of the majority of the population, but there are people that do struggle with it, right? They're worried about their fear of intoxicating the situation, right? Or making things worse. But wrapping your mind around the empathy side, right? That can be tough. Saying something that someone else sees that you wholeheartedly disagree with, is much easier said than done.
So what is some of your advice for how people can add that empathy aspect?
Well, the first thing is you got to be prepared for what you want the communication to look like. You know, that's the other thing. I think in negotiation, we do ourselves a huge disservice by spending months researching, doing data, right? Searching the internet, you know, looking at their LinkedIn, talking to their friends. And, you know, if you sequence communication properly, you're going to find all that stuff out in the first 15 minutes anyway. Right. So how are you managing your time leading up to that? And it'll probably only take you 15 or 20 minutes to think up, all right, these are the mislabels I'm going to use. It's the no or enter question I'm going to use, which are, you know, for those of you that aren't familiar, there's some skills that we list from the book and we talk about how to execute them.
Which they're awesome, by the way. They are awesome. You should actually read the book. But continue, Brandon.
Yeah, no, and to your point, I mean, we also talk about exact wording. And I think that's the other thing where, as a business, we really help people out is we're not so much focused on theory, like, oh, empathy is great and you got to use it at all these times. No, this is how you use it, right? These are the things you're going to say. So just right as a side note. But yeah, going into a negotiation, being prepared with some specific communication tools. But then also there's some guidelines that you always got to work within. First of all, there's never a linear process with human beings. People are just too emotional. We make decisions based on what matters to us. And by definition, that's an emotional thing. And so, right, there's no linear path. So understanding that you got to be flexible, but then at the very least, managing your last impressions. You know, these days, first and last. And the last is the important one, right? We say that the last impression is the lasting impression, right? And on Broadway, they've had a phrase for a long time, give them a big finish and they'll forgive you for anything. And so, right, understanding those emotional human nature components, using that last impression to your advantage every single time. And so what does that look like? And then, of course, it becomes part of your rhythm over time, just like anything else, right? Repetition is the mother of skill, as Tony Robbins likes to say. And it becomes a natural thing, right? It's just, once you've figured out the mechanics, muscle memory will kick in.
Well, and I think one of the things that I work with on my clients is we do cover a lot of the body language and nonverbal communication. And our goal is usually to have that first impression in place so that you don't have to work as hard for the lasting impression. And so I think that is a crucial component. But one thing I've seen a lot of other body language experts seriously neglect is the conflict and communication component that you are focusing on so heavily. And that was the part I was missing when I first got into body language. It was like, okay, I've made a great first impression, but I'm still not getting what I want. Why is that? And so I think the part you bring where how to actually handle the conflict and have the conversation instead of just like, excellent first impression, achieved. Now what? Yeah, it's interesting. And you make a great point to it as far as like, if you can set a certain standard with that first impression, it makes handling the last impression that much easier without question. And really one thing to just kind of give people hope is that just because you didn't start out great doesn't mean you can't finish really strong, you know, which is the other nice thing about the lasting impression. And yeah, to your point, what's great about some of the skills is it's like, all right, well, I'm stuck in this situation. What do I do? Well, you use a label, right? When this happens to you, use a label. And then this is how a label works. And these are different ways to construct it. And so there's nothing that's more helpful than that, right? When you go completely blank and you got that frog in your throat, right? And a bead of sweat's coming down your forehead, and I'll use a mirror, right? What's the last 3 words that they said? I just got to use a mirror and drop the proper tone of voice on it, right? Use the proper inflection and everything will be fine. I can't tell you how many times that has helped me, even in like a low pressure social situation. Because growing up, my parents thought I was slightly autistic because I was so bad at connecting with people. And so all the people skills I have learned from books the hard way and with lots of trial and error. So for me, small talk is still one of the things I hate the most. So the mirror and the label has, like, setting aside negotiation, has totally transformed my social small talk game. And it's a great way to practice.
I thank you for saying that. Yes, there is where you should practice. That's a great way to get your reps in. If you like RB and you don't like the small talk, use it as an opportunity to drop mirrors on people, and it's gonna be you're gonna surprise yourself.
All right, so let's talk about what mirrors are for those of our viewers who haven't yet bought either the audiobook or the actual book. And so I'm sure they'll do that right after they watch this. But what are mirrors?
So mirrors are simply repeating the last 3 to 5 words that someone has said.
The last 3 to 5 words?
There you go. Look at you. Yeah, it is that simple. And but one of the things to keep in mind with it is it's great to go in place of things like, what did you mean by that? Or please go on. You know, when you feel the need to want to say something like that, a mirror is a great place to drop, it's a great place to drop a mirror in. And then in addition, when you're caught, when you're stuck, like when you lose all brain function in a tough situation, right? And it's like, what am I supposed to do? In the echoes and the recesses of your mind, you can probably pick out the last 3 words that they said and just spit it back out. And you're going to create space for yourself, and they're going to be compelled to continue whatever their thought process was. I mean, we also refer to them as connectors, because especially with dealing with certain types of people, using a mirror will help them connect their thoughts together. Especially with very direct people, like things like, what did you mean by that? Will just get them to repeat the same thing, only louder. And a mirror will actually help them continue their thought process.
Now, I know in the book, there is an example where I'm not sure if it was you using this on your dad or someone else while you laughed at your dad, but he had this whole hour-long conversation where someone was just mirroring at him the whole time. And it took him that long to finally realize, he's just been mirroring this whole time.
Yeah, that's actually a very good friend of mine. It's like a brother from another mother type of friend. He did some work for us in the early days and in some AV, in AV capacity. He studied sound engineering. And so we were teaching back in Georgetown at that time. And Keenan is his name. It was one of his first classes with us. And Chris talked about mirrors that day. Keenan's a very analytical type, right? He likes to analyze things and compile data, and that's just how he absorbs information. And he thought to himself, right? I know him very well. He thinks to himself, this mirror technique, this sounds goofy, right? Last 3 to 5 words, it doesn't sound right. You know what? I'm going to try using it on the negotiation expert just to see how he reacts. So at that time, for another story, but Chris was living on a boat in DC, and we went back to the boat for a beer after class, and they had a conversation, and Keenan just started using mirrors on him. And Chris it was interesting to really watch my father open up, because he knew Keenan at the time, but didn't know him that well, and really just open up about this story. But I know, like, subconsciously, Keenan is like, look at me, I'm getting the negotiation guy, right? He's got that. So I had to stop it, right? 45 minutes of this, I was like, I can't take it anymore. Dad, Keenan has been doing mirrors to you. This is enough. And so, that's a fond memory, and we talk about that often.
Do you ever try to get each other now, you and your dad?
We do. It's a fun thing because it's become like it's a cultural thing. You find yourself playing with it, between each other. And another mirror story, funny enough, Dad and I were at a yoga retreat up by upstate New York, right? Imagine us at a yoga retreat. And I will admit, I do not look good in yoga pants, but so we're there, right? And we got a partnership worked out where they're trying to bring new clientele in and kind of expand their offerings. And so we get this great group and from all over the country. And one couple had flown in from San Francisco. And the husband of this couple, we ended up naming him Johnny Mirrors. And I know that on the plane ride to Albany from San Francisco, he told his wife on the plane, all I'm going to do is mirror people this weekend. I've read the book and I'm just going to mirror people. And that's exactly what he did. And he was probably the most liked guy out of the whole group. People were coming up to his wife and going, your husband is the nicest guy. He's so easy to talk to. And I mean, it drove her nuts. And it was funny, towards the end of the weekend, it got to the point where he'd be mirroring people and she'd walk up and she'd like jab him in the kidney or something. But it was crazy to see how popular this guy was. And it's like, I can't even tell you what his name was because we just called him Johnny Mears. That's where we got to. But he was the nicest guy and everybody loved him.
Interesting. So for all of you viewers or listeners who are thinking, wow, if only I could get people to like me, here's your answer. Repeat the last 3 to 5 words of whatever it is they said to you, and you'll have great conversations.
Yeah, that's it. And then add one more little piece of flavor to that, if you will. We like to say that mastery is in tonality. So when you're using your mirrors, add an upward inflection. Say it as if it's a question. And also play with saying it like it's a declarative statement. You know, as you're out there playing with it, play with those 2 different ways to deliver the mirror. You know, we like the upward inflection, but of course, your circumstance drives your strategy.
Now, viewers, just so you can hear that, for example, he said circumstance drives your strategy. If I was mirroring and I was using the question inflection, it would sound like circumstance drives, I already forgot the last word.
Strategy.
Circumstance drives strategy. But if I was saying it as a statement, it would be circumstance drives strategy. And so you can hear that going up or staying level that's what he's talking about when he says tonality.
That's it. That's right.
That's right. All right. So one thing I have people struggle with when we're talking about tactical empathy is some people say, you know what? If you're dealing with a tough situation or a tough person, you don't want to bend over backwards. Tactical empathy is letting them walk all over you. No, you've got to fight back. So to the people who think that, what would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a common one, right? Like you feel like you might be throwing yourself under the bus, or again, you're not standing up for your own justifications, your own point of view, your own objections. You know, that can be a tough thing. And so a great example of this that we like to use is the F-bomb, what we call the F-bomb in negotiation. And the F-bomb is fair or fairness. And so a common thing that a lot of people have run into in the private sector, or if you've had communication at any point in your life, you probably had somebody say, you know, we made you a fair offer, or we just want what's fair, or we want to be treated fairly. You know, you've probably heard that to some degree. Now, in order to eliminate that or remove it from the conversation using empathy, you'd be very proactive with it up front. And of course, there's more to it than this, but a big part of it would be, we want to make sure that you feel as though you're being treated fairly the whole time. And that's going to be part of your strategy up front. And essentially what that does, it takes away the permission for them to say, you guys haven't been fair with us. Now and you were taking an empathetic approach. And yeah. Yes, please.
Now this makes me think of a book I read called Get the Truth by a group of ex-CIA interrogators. Yeah. And they talk about how, they're not talking about like waterboarding or like coercive techniques. They're talking about non-coercive elicitation techniques where you just talk to people and get people to talk back to you. And they said, from what they've seen, if you treat someone in that like rough, oh, I'm going to get them, I'm going to nail them, the way you see any cop interrogation and TV drama go, people will dig in their heels and they will say to themselves, no matter what happens, I will not give this person the satisfaction of beating me. And so they won't talk, or in this negotiations example, they won't give in just because they don't like you and they see you as an enemy. And so this tactical empathy, it sounds like it's helping them to see you as a friend.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, you know, how you want to define friend or relationship, of course, I think is somewhat up for debate, but I think that's a great way to look at it. And you do a great job outlining a basic human nature instinct. And that is when we feel like our autonomy is being attacked, or we feel like we're being pushed into a corner, people will react in a way that will hurt themselves just because they know it hurts you too. My
mom called that cutting off your nose to spite your face. I was really good at that as a teenager. But
that's why they got the old cliche, because it's true. It describes human nature.
Yeah. And I think the thing about tactical empathy is that if it doesn't work, you can try something else. Like you can switch from being, oh, very understanding to, you know what, I've had enough, here's the line. But you can't switch from, you know what, I've had enough, here's the line, back to tactical empathy smoothly. If you come in guns blazing, people are going to have that in the back of their memory, even if you suddenly switch to, oh, how are you? Oh, it sounds like empathizing with them. And so you only have that one chance for a first impression. And you can draw a line in the sand later, but you can't smooth it over and pretend it never happened later.
That's exactly it. That's a great point. And so we wouldn't say that it's impossible, but it is a tough thing to do. I mean, if you're starting off with that gruff coming down on you like a train on the tracks, you know, that's a tough thing to recover from. I mean, you are digging yourself a hole, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And but that's the nice thing about empathy, right? There's a lot of different ways to execute, right? There's not just one approach, which is one of the reasons why we have a list of 9 skills that we call the negotiation 9, right? There's a lot of different ways. But even in addition to that, one thing to always keep in mind is, you know, again, right, lasting impressions is important. And that switch, right, the flexibility that we talked about earlier, right, being able to make that switch. And once you've got the 9 skills in your tool set, then you got a plethora of options to go with.
A lot of options. Yeah. Now, as I was reading something else, actually for self-defense, I found a study by David Luckenbill, for you viewers, if you want to look it up. It was published in a book called The Dark Side of Man, and it studied all the murders in a California county over a 10-year period. And these murderers were asked, why did you kill your victims? And you would think, okay, murderers murder for a lot of reasons, but there were only 2 reasons that came up. 34% said they killed the victim because the victim challenged their authority. 66% said they killed the victim because the victim insulted them in some way. And it wasn't necessarily because they were actually insulted or actually challenged, but the murderer in their state of mind saw a lot of different behaviors that could have been like low-level, non-threatening behaviors. They saw them in as a challenge, or they saw them as an insult. And now this actually at first made me terrified because my husband likes to shoot off his mouth when we are walking in public places. And I actually looked out to where he was standing and I was like, I was right, you are gonna get us killed. But I think this tactical empathy, these skills give you something to say even in really bad situations that are way less likely to get you hurt or killed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you know, there's an interesting story we talk about often in hostage negotiation. They even have repeat customers, which is one of the reasons why, you know, you never lie and you always manage how the ending goes. And the barricaded suspect had been barricaded before, and he's on the phone with the negotiator, and he literally stops in the middle of the conversation and says, "You're not doing a good job. You're supposed to be building rapport with me." Because he had been barricaded before, and the last negotiator did a great job. But again, right, his trigger at that point, right, he felt his autonomy was being attacked, whatever he was feeling that the negotiator was called, and he switched into that mode like
he's giving a Yelp customer review.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that story.
That's hilarious. Oh, man.
But no, it's to your point, right? Again, human nature, and what's even scarier about it, right? When you take a real empathetic point of view, especially for those that felt insulted by the victim in some way, maybe the victim never had any intention of making them feel that way, but it doesn't change the fact that that's how they felt. Yeah. And that's one of the powerful things about empathy. When you start to realize, like, okay, maybe I don't agree with this, maybe I don't feel like I caused it, does not change the fact that it still exists in the mind of the person on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
And how do you address it? How do you diffuse it?
Well, one thing, before we get to diffusing, when you were talking about, hey, they were insulted even though the victim didn't intend to insult, it made me think of how you recommend how and what questions instead of why questions. Will you talk to that for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind touching on that. So we have a skill that we refer to as calibrated questions. And the Jim Camp group, they refer to, he wrote the book Start With No. They refer to them as interrogative questions. You've heard the term many times, open-ended questions. When with our calibrated questions, we really focus down on what and hows. We actually eliminate whens, wheres, whos. We don't have any use for them because the answer is very short. It's very, it's not an expanded version of what you could get them to say, right? So that's why we really focus on what and how. And then we like to say, and sometimes why. And so, the first thing and what does, how does why make people feel, RB? When you throw a why question to somebody, how do they instantly react every time?
Usually it's defensive. Even if it's like a really low level question like, oh, why did you do that today? It's like, don't question my judgment.
Yes, that's it. People automatically get defensive. And it's one of the funny things about negotiation that transcends culture, because every culture, every language has got a word for why. And in every culture and every language, when people are asked why, it makes them feel defensive. My personal theory, I think it comes from when you're a kid, right? When no matter who you are, if you did something wrong as a little kid, right? Your parent, your guardian, whoever was around is responsible for you. What's the first thing they said? Why did you do that? Right? I told you not to do that. You did it anyway. Why did you do that? Why do you keep driving me crazy? I think that's where it stems from.
That makes sense.
And yeah, and so and plus, I get smacked in the head as a kid. It's another great thing about being a son of an FBI negotiator, right? When you're wrong, you get smacked in the head sometimes. So, I experienced that as a child myself. So that said, we cannot ignore that in the negotiation context. What you got to understand is it exists, and then how do we play within the rules of the game, as it were. And so knowing that why automatically makes people defensive, and it's going to do it every time, even if it's a low level question. Why did you wear that shirt? Why did you wear a red lipstick? Right? What it doesn't matter what it is, right? It just instantly, that's how we feel internally. So how do we use that to our advantage? One is any why question that comes to your mind can be changed to a what. No matter what why question you think of, you can drop a what in front of it and ask the same question, have it be that much more effective.
For example, with the shirt or lipstick example you gave for the why question, how do you flip those to a what?
What made you wear that red lipstick?
That's really easy. What made you instead of why did you?
Exactly. It's not accusatory, right? The thing is, you brought up earlier. Yeah, shifting the blame. That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. And the why thing, again, right? Internally, we're thinking like, well, what's wrong with what I said? Or what's wrong with this, right? None of those questions pop up in someone's mind when you just simply change it to a what, right? It's one of the great ways to help quiet the inner voice that we all have when we're in a tough negotiation situation. And then another really effective way to use why is when you want to get them to defend you.
For example.
So you know that it causes defensiveness. When is defensiveness advantageous for you? Right? When they're defending your position. So you got a new client, they're on the fence about buying your product. They got something similar already, or they think they got something similar.
So you say, why would you choose to work with us?
Yeah. Why would you bother changing away from the way you're doing things now? Great question Chris used to always ask is, why would you bother listening to a hostage negotiator talk about negotiation? Right? The answer to those two questions is, well, we're having problems with our current provider. These are all the things. This is a list of things we're trying to solve, right? And we think you guys can help us do it. And for Chris's side, hostage negotiators deal with tense situations. They're instantly defending your position.
And they've given you a whole lot of information that you can use later in the sale.
That's it. Yeah. Then you've made yourself smarter, right? Every negotiation, one of the main intentions is you want to be smarter coming out the end of that conversation than you were going in.
Pretty good strategy. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, we use that one often, especially when we're coaching people. That's always a big focus.
So, I guess in summary, when you are dealing with someone where things are a little tense, you're not sure exactly what's going on, you should have at least a few what or how questions, or even those careful why, where you want them to defend you questions, in order to have something to say in that tense moment. Now, going back to those murder and victim situations,
Yes.
instead of saying, why would you shoot me? She might have said, why would you leave me alive? Which would kind of switch it around, I think. Because why would you shoot me is like, why they have to defend that action, which now they're thinking about it, but why would you leave me alive? Maybe that switches it around.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ways to approach, because that's a highly emotional situation.
Very bad situation. Things have already gone very badly if you are in that situation.
That's exactly right. And one of the things about, understanding that emotion is ever present, when emotions are high, for all intents and purposes, that gives you more material to work with. That's one of the ways we look at it, right? What's that?
Because they're obvious, and you don't have to guess, I wonder what that person is feeling.
It's blatantly obvious what the presenting emotion is. And that makes your job much easier, because instead of trying to guess or feel them out, like, there it is, right? In bright red letters. And
you are angry, or you are afraid.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, speaking to, a how question, I think a label would be good, similar to what you just said. But speaking to a how question and trying to convince the guy not to kill you, how did you find yourself here today?
It seems like society drove you to this.
Yeah.
What made you pick up that gun today?
Seems like society's let you down.
That's even better. Oh, that is so good.
Yeah, but for those tense ones, what and hows are always good, but the labels, like you just started to lay out, those are definitely a go-to in a situation. When we're coaching people, we want to go with labels first. And that's why.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not sure if the research I read was in this negotiation book or in a different book, but it talked about how the emotions you are feeling when you are like caught up in the grip of something, they are way down in those primitive areas. But labeling them, that requires you to actually think about it, which can draw you out of those really primitive, powerful areas of the brain and back to a more logical, cooperative state of mind.
Yeah, that's another great way to look at that. What's fun about using the labels, and for those of you that right don't quite understand, it's just simply a verbal observation. And we talk about the structure in a couple different ways, but making a verbal observation, it focuses your brain to listen better. We talk a lot about how the brain functions and the working mind, and the slow thinking brain, the fast thinking brain that Kahneman and Tversky talk about, right? We incorporate all of that in. But that said, at best, most people are listening at about a 60% capacity. And we kind of break down what those different levels are. But when you use a label, it forces you into listening for dynamics, listening for the things that go unsaid. And so we do a fun exercise with people when we train, where we have a hostage situation and the demand is, I need a car in 60 seconds or she dies. And we talk about, well, how would you label that? What would you label? What are you listening for? What you got to hear is that person wants to live. They want to get out. They got something they want to see tomorrow or do tomorrow or whatever the case may be. And in a tense situation, I need a car in 60 seconds. You want to go, I can't give you a car, right? That's a restriction. That's not something I can do. You want to respond directly to the demand. When simply a better response is, it sounds like you want to make it out of here, right? And in a lot of ways, you're ignoring the demand altogether. But you're talking to the bigger demand that's behind it. That's it. What's the underlying dynamic, right? What are they telling you without telling you? And you get a better feel for that the more you do this stuff. Like your intuition, your gut, if you want to call it, really starts to pick up on those little things. Like, what are they really trying to say to me? And then you throw it into a verbal observation, and now you're having a whole new conversation. This is so interesting to talk about. If you look at the clock, I can't believe it. It's already been 50 minutes. Or can I do math? It might have been more than 50 minutes. But this is really cool to talk about. And I think this is something that a lot of people have never heard verbalized in a way that was not just be nice to people and they'll be nice to you. And I think when some people look at tactical empathy and then discount it, they're not actually looking at tactical empathy. They're looking at what they think it is, which is that golden rule, be nice to people and they'll be nice to you.
and they already have reason to distrust that. But I think that's why it's so cool you included the tactical part in front of it. So you could talk to both of those groups, the really assertive and the really not at all assertive people, and let them know there's a part of it there's both elements are necessary in this mixture.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And another thing that we talk about often, and maybe, something we might save for later, but, there's a fine line between being nice and being likable.
Talk about
and
that. We have some
don't
time.
always equal each other. No, very good. I mean, we got some blog topics on it as well. I mean, we can refer people to that at some point, but there's a very fine line. And unfortunately, when it comes to being nice, right, I'll be nice to them and they'll be nice to me, treat others the way you want to be treated. You can set yourself up, because the big part that you're forgetting is that other person is probably not like you.
That's the big difference.
Right. Yeah. When we carry that personal bias into a negotiation, it can be detrimental to our cause, because the other person is not like you. I mean, when you start breaking down negotiator type, and then you really go back to the F word, right? Fairness, how people see fairness, and that changes based on what side of the table they're sitting on, then you can draw even more differences between individuals. So that's one big thing to let go. So the niceness thing, and unfortunately, if that's something you're naturally good at, when you run into a shark, you've also experienced getting run over.
Yeah.
And so what it takes to actually be likable, again, is going to be dictated by your circumstance. And it's going to change slightly, right? If somebody likes to have the small talk conversation, you're probably going to be, they're going to like you more if you want to engage in that small talk conversation. Someone like yourself, like RB, she has no use for small talk. And if you're leading with small talk, you are wasting RB's time, and the likable meter is dwindling, and you're being as nice as you possibly could be. So, those are things you got to take into account. I could talk about this all day, right? We instruct on it. But
this is so much fun.
It's so interesting, right? There's so many different ways that you can frame stuff.
So do you have 5 more minutes?
Sure. Yeah, I got to the top of the hour blocked out.
All right. Then let's talk about how you help people. Like, what services do you currently have available, and what kind of clients are you looking for?
So what's interesting is, especially since the book has come out, we've started to really shift towards catering to the individual. We've historically been big on corporate training, and we still do a lot of corporate training, but there's so many individuals now that have picked up the book. There's a certain amount of demand that needs to be solved. So we do a lot of individual coaching. We also have, we'll be in 10 cities this year around the United States. Our first event is going to be in Atlanta on March 22nd, I believe. And we're going to be in Chicago. We're going to be in New York. The list is on our website there, but that's another way to engage. And we do our live events. It's fun because everyone's there, right? Chris is there. I'm there. Derek's there. Isaac will be there. And that's the only time when we're all in the same place kind of training together. So it's fun to see us, meet us all, and then also get a feel for kind of how each guy operates, because we all got our own individual style. But the coaching, the live events, we do a lot of corporate training. This is the first time I've talked about this publicly, really, but there's a virtual course that we are just putting the final touches on. It's a self-guided virtual course. We're referring to it as a Beyond the Book series. And several videos that Chris and I have recorded where we're walking through concepts in the book and talking about additional details and additional things that we didn't get to touch on in the book as well. So, those are really the big ones. But I mentioned the blog earlier. Every Tuesday, we have a blog that comes out. We call it The Edge, the Negotiation Edge. And that's the best way to stay on top of what's going out, because we advertise there. We notify our fans there before it even hits social media.
I know, I'm on your mailing list.
There you go.
So it sounds like you and your dad are the core, and then you also have 2 other trainers who work with you to teach these skills. So how does that work? Are you each in different cities? What's going on?
So when we do training, especially on a corporate level, we always have 2 instructors present. Because Chris and I have been doing it the longest, we've done the most training together. However, especially these days, really dictated by schedule. Sometimes like last week of January, I was in the city with Chris Monday and Tuesday, and then I flew to another city to meet Derek to be with him Thursday and Friday. And they're doing things like that too, right? Chris is going from one keynote to meet Isaac in Boston, and so a lot of it's really just kind of dictated by schedule. But they're all fun guys to work with, especially since Derek and Isaac also have the crisis negotiator background. And those guys taught together when they were in law enforcement in the Virginia area. So they're familiar with each other even before Black Swan. So it's a fun core group. And those are our main instructors. Oddly enough, my wife, new wife,
Congratulations.
she helps us out a lot with the marketing. She's technically our director of marketing. And she was a huge addition to the team because Chris and I we're not marketers. There's things we do well. Marketing is not huge, right? And so she's been a huge help. And we got a small team. We got a great team.
Well, and I think this book is one of the best that I've seen. And I've read a lot of negotiation books just because it makes it so easy to follow. And there are so many next steps that you have available that people can get involved for lots of different price ranges. Like you have the blog, which is available for free. You have a study plan on your website available for free. But you also have these programs that whether people are investing as a whole corporation or as just one little person wanting to go through the training, you have so many options. And these skills, they don't just help you in negotiating a business deal. They also help you with negotiating a salary, negotiating with your spouse, negotiating with your kids, negotiating in any aspect of your life. And I think these are so crucial. So where do you see this going in the next 5 years?
Well, it'd be nice to own the word negotiation. And really what I mean by that is, if a conversation about negotiation comes up anywhere on the planet and people say, have you read that book yet? Have you picked up Derek's book? Have you picked up Chris's book? Have you been to one of those Black Swan events, right? If that was part of every conversation in some fashion, that'd be a very cool thing. 5 years, I think it's, that's a short time frame. But, I'd love to get there at some point. And in a lot of ways, we're on our way because we got a lot of great fans. And you spoke to the blog. I mean, for those of you out there, we also take inquiries. We have fans that reach out and say, hey, we'd love you to write an article about this topic. And, we got great support from our fan base, which is a very cool thing.
All right. So let's say we are going to give you one last minute to talk to these viewers. What is the very last thing you want them to know?
The very last thing I want them to know is, can there be two things?
Sure.
All right, very good. Well, the first thing, you alluded to it earlier, and it's making the decision. And it is not an easy thing. It is going to make you feel awkward. But just know when you actually have the feeling of awkwardness, that is the brain functioning in a way that it's not used to. And you're actually building new neural pathways in your brain. That's what that feeling is. And so you're going to have to put yourself through that in order to improve, right? In order to bust through that wall, you got to make a decision to put yourself in an awkward place. And then secondly, a great way to sign up for the blog. If you text the words FBI empathy, all caps, one word, to 28228, right? You can't get on our website or you just, quick way to do it through text message. And again, it's free, comes out every Tuesday. That's FBI empathy, one word, to 28228.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Brandon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, RB. This has been a lot of fun.